Good morning, everyone. As you can see, the big tent behind us is for tonight's big Purim celebration at Palm Beach Synagogue, and everyone's invited to hear the Megillah and celebrate Purim with us. But before we get to the feast of the celebration tonight, we have the fast of Esther today, where we fast to commemorate the fast that Esther instituted for the Jewish people prior to her going to risk her life by going to her husband, King Achashverosh, to intercede and prevail for the salvation of the Jewish people. And when you look at the story of Mordechai and Esther, you find something fascinating. You see, Esther was the niece of Mordechai, and she was an orphan. Her father died while her mother was pregnant, and her mother died after she was born. And Uncle Mordechai adopted her and raised her and cared for her. And when she was chosen to be one of the beautiful women taken to the palace for King Achashverosh's beauty pageant, the Megillah says, Ubechol Yom V'Yom, every day, Mordechai would go to the court of the king's palace, Ladat et Shalom Esther, to hear, to see the whereabouts and the welfare and the well-being of Queen Esther. In other words, Mordechai was so devoted to his niece that when she was taken against her will to the palace, he would go every day to get a glimpse, to hear about how she's doing, to look after her, to let her know that he was watching over her. And even though he couldn't meet with her, just from a distance, Esther would see Mordechai outside the gates of the palace through her window, or he would maybe get a glimpse of her or send a message to her, or she to him. And this kept the strength and the confidence of Esther, knowing that she was being looked after by her beloved uncle. And what happens, lo and behold, many years later, 5 years later, after Mordechai never missed a day, 365 days a year for 5 years straight, of going to the gates of the palace every day, whether it was Shabbat or holidays, to look out for his beloved niece Esther, the evil Haman decrees for the destruction and annihilation of the Jewish people. And now Mordechai turns to his beloved niece and says, the Jewish people need you to save us from this evil decree. And Esther rises to the occasion and risks her life and saves the Jewish people for all of eternity. And here we are 2,500 years later, celebrating the miracle of Purim and the salvation from God through the righteous, heroic woman Esther. And today, on the fast of Esther, we remember her courage and also her faith in God. And what this shows us is that, as they say in life, what goes around comes around. It was Mordechai's love and devotion to his niece to save her life after she was orphaned that turned around and saved his life and the entire Jewish nation. And indeed, on this day of Tanis Esther, and tomorrow in Purim, we remember this lesson, that the world is a circle. It's topsy-turvy. What goes around comes around. And any goodness and kindness extended always returns to us. It's a story that I read in Reader's Digest. Over 30 years ago, a little baby was born in California. His name was Chris Trokey. He was born premature, 3.2 pounds. The doctors gave him a 50-50 chance of survival. But his family pediatrician was so devoted that he not only checked on him every day, but many nights slept alongside him to help him regain his strength and survive. And indeed, Chris Trokey went on to survive as an infant and lived a very healthy life. Well, 30 years later, he was a paramedic. And they got a call about an SUV that was hit by a semi-truck and flipped over on the highway in California. And Chris Trokey and his colleagues ran to the scene of the accident, and the SUV was engulfed in flames, and they pried open the doors and released the driver, took him into the back of the ambulance. As they were rushing him into the hospital, Chris Trokey was sitting with this man in the back of the ambulance, brought him to the hospital, and after they checked him in to the emergency room, he inquired for the name of the patient. And the name of the patient was Michael Scheiner. Chris Trokey said, could this be Dr. Michael Shannon, my pediatrician, who my family always tells the story of his love and devotion, how he sat by my bed for months and watched over me till I was strong enough to go home? And indeed, that's who it was. Dr. Michael Shannon, who had saved his life some 30 years earlier. Well, every year on the day of that accident, Dr. Michael Shannon and Chris Trokey get together, have dinner together, and celebrate the day that marks the circle of events of how they each were fortunate to be saved by one another. Have a wonderful day and a happy Purim. And on Purim, we extend acts of kindness and charity and generosity to our friends by giving the gifts of food and the charity to the poor, and remembering that when we give, often we are receiving in return more than we actually give. Have a happy Purim.